Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial on complete .NET Web APIs. And today the topic which I'll be covering is uh, another example or another option for global error handling and flow control. So if you have seen my previous tutorials, I had shown you the usage of custom exceptions. So if you can see here, so in the application layer, we had a common folder where inside the exceptions folder, we used to create individual domain exceptions for example, company not found exception, which used to inherit from the I application exception. Similarly, employee not found exception. So this is also an option, but there's another option which I prefer, that is using a third-party library called as ErrorOr, and I'll be showing you that. So what we can do now is I will first download the NuGet package of ErrorOr. So what we'll be doing is we'll be creating the domain errors inside the domain layer. So you can prefer to create it in the application layer as well if there are application specific other application specific errors. But what I prefer, or the way how I structure, is I create it in the domain so that all the domain related errors, as well as if there's any global error associated, I can create it here. So let's go ahead and download the NuGet package first. So I'll go to manage NuGet packages, and the library name is ErrorOr. So let's click over here and download ErrorOr. Let's make sure that we download the latest library available. At the time I'm recording this video, the latest version is 1.2.1, but when you are actually watching it, the version of ErrorOr might have been updated, so you can download it accordingly. Okay, so once we've downloaded the ErrorOr package, the next thing what I would do is I'll create another folder inside the common folder, and let me call it as errors. I'll call it as errors inside domain common. And now once that's done, I will start creating our domain errors, what we had. So for example, when we had created exceptions, we had something like company not found, duplicate company, then employee not found, and there can be even a duplicate employee. So for that, what I'll do is I'll create a class called errors dot company first, wherein all our domain errors related to company will reside. So let me add a new class, name it as errors dot company. Okay, so once that's done, let's fix this here. And what I'll do is I'll name it as public. So I'll call it public static partial. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a partial class here. And now inside this partial static class, what I'll do is I'll create another subclass, which is also a static subclass, public static class, and this I'll name it as company. And now all the errors or exceptions which are related to company, we can have it here. So let me just rename it. Yeah. So this is a partial class and there's a subclass called company. And now what I'll do is I will create the error methods here. So let me also call it public static, and the return type should be error. And this error belongs to the ErrorOr library, which we just downloaded. So you can just put the using error. So this is the return type of the methods. I'll call this method as duplicate company. Okay. What I'll do is I'll accept a string message. So wherever we are calling this, we can just pass in the custom exception message. I'll call it message, and default I'll keep it as null. So if nothing is passed, then we'll have a default message ready. So now this method, what it will do is it will return error. So this is from the ErrorOr dot. And for duplicate exception, if you see, the ErrorOr has type of exceptions already defined, like conflict, which are general kind of exceptions: conflict, failure, not found, unexpected error, that is 500, or validation errors. So in our case, for duplicate company, let's put it as conflict. And the most important feature, which because of which I prefer this library, is this feature wherein we can add a custom error code for each messages. So I can just put in an error code. So let me give it a naming convention so that I can track if there are a lot of errors. So I'll prefix it with ERR, and then the name of the module, I'll call it COMP company, and then I'll just number it. So I'll just say 000. So I'll call it 000. Then the next one I can call it as 001. Okay, so this is the error code. And after this, it takes another parameter called description. And the description, what we can do is we can either take in the message, or if the message is null, we can give a default message and call it as duplicate. So we can just say the company already exists in the system. Yeah, so if nothing is passed here, it will just give this company is already existing in the system. Now let's add another one. So we had another one for if in case if a company is not found. So you can just add another entry here. So create another method in this class, but this time I'll name it as a company does not exist. The company does not exist. Again, it will take in a message, and this time instead of conflict, we'll call it as not found, so that we get the status code as 404. Also, another thing is the status code will be 404 for not found. And this, what I showed you, this is a custom error code and not the status code. Okay, just to clarify the difference between both of them. So not found. And for this, this will again have prefix error and the company, because it is an error which is associated to the company domain. And I'll number this as 001. And the description again will be, say, company does not exist in the system. So if, let's just put this statement, company does not exist in the system. And if it is a duplicate, then company already exists in the system. So we are done with the errors for company. So let's create another one. Let's do it for employee as well. Let's have that structure in place. So I'll create another partial class called ES. So another benefit of the partial classes, you can have partial classes with same name. That's the reason we use to call it partial. If I don't call it as partial, then I cannot create another class called errors in the same namespace. Okay, so I'll call this one as errors.employee.cs, errors.employee.cs. And then let me call this, let's change this here. And once that's done, let me just paste it here. Yeah. So for errors also, we have similar kind of things. We have duplicate employee. And here I'm naming the custom error code as ErrorEMP. So duplicate employee error is 00001 is employee does not exist. And then these are the custom messages. So we have done with this. So let me also go ahead and create another one, just in case if we have an exception which is unhandled or which we are not expecting. So in that case, for that, what I'll do is I'll create another class. I'll name it as errors.unexpected.cs. I'll call it as dot unexpected.cs. Once that's done, let's call it, let me create the partial class and the subclass. If I paste it here, so if you see, we have another partial class called errors, and this time the subclass, I've named the subclass as unexpected. And the error method I'm calling is as internal server error. Again, I'll pass in a message defaulted to null. And this time I'll use error.unexpected to return. And the code I'm using is ERR unexpected. And the description again, if something is provided, it will be sent. Otherwise, it will give you a default message of an unexpected error occurred. Okay. So once this is set up, the next thing what we have to do is to use it. And the way we can use it is, so let's go to our controllers. So let me open the controllers. I'll open companies controller. Okay, so let's try to use it in get company by ID. So I'll just give you an example how we can use it. Okay, and before that, so since we are doing it here, we'll have to change certain return types. So let's go to the company by ID command and company by ID command handler. So if we go to application company module, and if we go to queries and just click on company by ID and just go to company by ID query. So now here we were returning company response. So when we have ErrorOr in place, what we need to do is instead of returning company response, we just have to make it as the ErrorOr. So it's like a generic type ErrorOr of company response, and then just include ErrorOr. So the way it works is instead of throwing an exception, we will just be returning errors of type ERR, of type error, the partial classes which we had just created. So we'll be returning those errors. So if you see it here, so now we'll go to the query handler. And here also the return type would be ErrorOr of type company response. Okay, let me include ErrorOr. Now, instead of now since it is returning company error response, we'll have to return it task of ErrorOr of company response. Okay, now here earlier what we were doing was we were throwing this exception and we were using the custom exceptions which we created in the exceptions class, in the exceptions custom exception classes. So now we'll not use this method, and instead of throwing an exception, so here we are throwing company not found exception. So instead, let's use and return the errors which we just created. So for company, we'll use errors. So the errors belongs to so errors dot. So let's use the namespace of the partial class. So if we just go to common errors, error.company, let's use this namespace. I'm not sure why it's not detecting. Maybe something wrong with Visual Studio. I'll check that up later, but Yeah. So if you see, I've included this. So errors dot company. So this way you can select any of your domains. So if you say errors dot, I have employee, unexpected, and company. So these were the subclasses I created in different partial classes. So I say errors dot company dot so this is required company. So company does not exist. So this is company does not exist, and I can prefer to pass in a message or no, because I've kept it default as null. So let's pass in the message because we can pass in the actual data with the request ID of the company which is not found. So I'll just say the system does not have any company with ID request ID. Okay. So that's it. So this is it. So what it returns is, in case of any errors, it will return an error or error object, and if there is no error, it will return the actual object which is supposed to return. So now the way we'll use it in the controller is so we will be using it here. So this is the place where we'll be using it. So instead of this, what we'll do is we'll just take it and store it in an object called result, where result. So now if you just hover on the result, you see it is returning error or of company response and not company response. Okay. So now the way you can use it is result dot match. There's a method called match. And now inside match, so we can just remove this. We can return match, and we can just have R such that. So we have two responses here. One is in case of a success, one is in case of an error. So in case of success, what we can return is we can just say okay and pass in R. So if you see, this R is nothing but company response. And in case of error, we can just say errors equal to, and then we can just say problem. So the problem details we had, and we can pass in errors. We can pass in the errors, but I think problem details does not take in a list of error. Or so what I'll do is I'll have a custom implementation for this. So uh, let's create a base API controller. So if I come to controllers, and I'll create a new controller called base API controller. We call it base API controller. Call it as base API controller. Okay. I name it and let the base API controller inherit from controller base, which belongs to MVC. So controller base, and what we can do here is rest all the controllers. Instead of inheriting from controller base, we'll inherit from base API controller. Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll create a method here called protected action result of. This is my custom method for problem. So this is not the problem details which MVC has. This is my custom problem method. And what I'll do here is I'll expect list of error or list of errors of error or. So this belongs to error or. I'll expect this. And now let's see if we can call, we'll implement this in a bit. Let's just go back to the controller now. Okay. So now if you see, since we have this now and we come to base API controller now, this is, we can pass in the list of errors which are coming from ErrorOr to this, because this is a custom method. Okay. And that's it for returning from the controller. So now the next thing is we need to implement this piece here. So before that, I'll just show you an example. So if you see, if we go to get company handler here, currently we have only one exception, or one exception, which is, so this is basically not throwing an exception. This is just returning an object. So the flow of our control is going in this, wherein the company is, required company is null. That is, the company does not exist. So it has recorded this exception, but the execution won't stop there. It will go forward. So if there is any other exception, specifically in case of validations, so we'll cover that up in the next tutorial, that is doing validations, fluent validations. Okay. So in case of validation, there can be cases wherein, for example, if you have a form where name is required and email is required, so it can have multiple errors caught, which are of type validation, that is name required and email required. So you can either return this error, or takes in which returns either a single error or list of errors. That's the reason when we are collecting it here in the controller, we are collecting a list of errors. So there can be a single or multiple errors which can be collected and thrown for us to display it as a response. Okay. So for that, now let's create the problem details method. Okay. So first thing what we'll do is we'll check if the error count is 0. If error count is 0, we will return problem directly. That is, there can't be a case wherein we are actually returning errors and the count is 0. But just to be sure, in such cases, we'll just return the problem, that is the default problem details which the MVC provides. Okay. Now the next case will be if there are multiple errors, what we'll do is we'll take in all. So we'll check if errors dot all, let's say error such that error dot type, let's check the type. So if the type is of validation, error type dot validation. So if it is a validation type, we'll handle it separately, because validation, there are specific exceptions in case of validation. So we'll handle this differently. So for now, we'll just return problem. We'll just say return problem. And the next step would be, if there is only one error, then we just return the first one. That is, we'll return problem of errors. So since this is a list, we'll just return the first one. In most of the cases, it will be just one error which is produced. So in that case, we'll return problem of errors. Yeah. So we don't have this method. So let's create it. So let's create a method which is taking problem with one error. So let me call it as private action result of problem, which is just taking an error from ErrorOr. Okay, and now we can just use similar kind of logic what we had used in the error controller. So if we go to the errors controller here, which we had controller here, which we were returning service exceptions and using switch. So similar kind of thing we'll use it there. Yeah, also another change is now this should be base API controller since we are inheriting from there. Yeah, so here what I will do is I'll just take in the error and check of which type it is. So I'll use a switch case. If it is error of type conflict, I'll return 409 as status code. If it is validation error, I'll say bad request. If it is not found, I'll say not found, and default, it will say internal server error. And then I'll return problem details. So this is the default problem detail, which takes in status code, title, and error description. Okay. So that's for problem. So now in case of validation, so let's create another method for validation problems. So let me call it as validation problem. Call it as validation problem, and we'll pass in list of errors to it. Okay. So, and let me create that method here. So how I will handle this is, so let me just create validation problem. Why is this saying ambiguous reference? Let's check what is going wrong here. Oh, yes. So it should be from ErrorOr. Yeah. So now we have validation problems. Yeah, so we've created the validation problem method here. So what this is doing is it's taking the model state dictionary and it is checking for each error and then adding it as a model error with the error code and description. And then finally, it is passing the model state dictionary to the default validation problem method, which MVC provides. So that's how we are handling the validation errors. Okay. So the base API controller of ours is ready. So if we just go here, we've changed it to this. So let's do that for all the controllers. Otherwise, Swagger UI might break. So we have the company's controller, which is sorted. Let's go to employees controller. This also we'll change it to base API controller. Same thing we'll do for the version 2 ones. We'll call this as base API controller. And since base API controller in turn is inheriting from the controller base, everything else should work as it is. We've changed this. We've also changed the error controller. Okay. So we are done with this now. So finally, we are set up with this. So here, let's try to run this now and see how it is working. So we are returning this error here, that is company does not exist. So let's go ahead and try to get a company by ID and see how it is working. So first let's run a successful query and then followed by a failure query. So let's go to API documentation. Okay. So company, so let's check what company is available. So let's say we take in the ID for Tata Consultancy Services. Say get companies by ID and just paste it here. So if the company exists, it is giving me the company. So the success path is running perfectly fine. So now let me just change this ID and say Z. So this company does not exist. So it should throw as a not found. And let's see how it is throwing not found. So if we see here, it is perfectly throwing the error. So the error which we had given, system does not have any company with ID this 404. Okay. One thing we are still missing here is we are not making use of the custom error property which we had created. So let's do that. So if you see in the errors, company errors, we have made use of these custom error codes. So let's make sure we use them. And the way we can do that is in the API controller. So we had created custom problem details factory here, and we were adding this custom property. So instead of this, what we'll do is we'll remove this custom property and we'll use the error codes which we have created. So for doing that, what we will do is we'll create where errors equal to, we have HTTP context object here. So we'll make use of that. HTTP context dot extensions dot items text dot items, and let's call this as errors. We'll pass these errors to HTTP context items in our base API, and we'll catch it here so that we can use this, and we'll name it as errors list of error, and this belongs to ErrorOr. Okay, these errors, and the next thing what we'll do is we'll just check if the errors is not null, and then we'll add it to problem detail extension. So if errors is not null, we make a check, and then problem details dot extensions dot add. We'll call the property as error codes, and then all the errors we'll display it here. Okay, and now the way we can push those error codes is in the base API controller. What we will do is we will just, before returning the problems, we'll just say HTTP context dot items, and we'll add the items and call it errors. And for this, we'll just pass in all the errors which we have. Okay. Once that's done and we've intercepted it here, now let's have a look. Let's run it again and check if we are getting it. Okay, let's go to API, HTML. Yeah, so let's get the same ID and get companies by ID. Let's put in the ID here, execute, so it's fine. Let's change it to Z. And now if you see the status, so we also have a custom error code, which is ErrorComp001, which is not found error, that is 404. And it is also having a custom message that is system does not have any company with ID so and so. Okay, so that's it. So one more thing which I'll show you is, instead of adding the hard-coded strings like this, what we can do is I can just create a static class. So we'll go to applications, and inside common, utilities, I'll just create a class called global item keys or global constants. I'll just call it as global constants, and I'll call this as public static global constants, and then I'll create a constant and name it as errors. Okay. So once we do this, we can use it as global constants here. So instead of errors, we can just say global constants utilities global constants dot errors, so that whenever we want to change something, we can just change it in one place, that is here, instead of running around the entire application to change if there's any issue. The same thing inside the custom problem details factory also, we can just use it here and call it global constants dot errors. Okay, so this was one approach. Now another approach I can not another approach, I'll show it to you for another method. So we had done it for get companies by ID because this was returning something. So now in case if your method is not returning anything, like for example, update company. So if let's go to update company command handler. So if I just go to uh, company module and commands and update company, if you see update company is not returning anything. So in this case, what we can use is we can just use error or of something called as unit. So this unit belongs to mediator. So it's like a structure which they have created in case if we have to use a data type which is void. Since we can't use void, we can definitely use unit from mediator. So let's use that. Similarly, in update company command handler, here we'll call this as I request handler, comma, error or of unit. Let's include this here. And again, the return type of this would be error or of unit. Okay, and the way we'll use it here is if there's an error that is company not found, we will just return errors dot company dot company does not exist, and we'll pass in the same message. But now if you see, it is still giving me a squiggly because this initially did not have any return type, but now we have unit. So what you can do is you can just return, it will say all code paths don't return a value. So we can just say return unit dot value. Now it will stop complaining. And now let's go to the controller, and here we'll use it as it is, as result, as where result await. So the result is nothing but error or of unit. And now what we can return is result dot match. We can just say r such that no content in case of a successful execution. But if there are errors, We'll just pass the errors to our custom problem details method which we have created. And that's it. That's as easy as it can get. So let's try to run it and check now. Let's try to update something. Let's have a company called Tata Consultancy Services. Let me update it. So if I go to put and I specify the ID, and this time I'll call it as TCS. Address, I'll say Bangalore, India. Okay, and let me just change the ID here so that we get the not found exception. Now, if you see, we execute this and we get a 404. It's giving us the system does not have any company with this ID and the error code perfectly. Okay, and if we give this the proper ID, then it should update it successfully and give us a 204. So this should now get updated to TCS. So let's just query and check. And yes, so it's working fine. One more last item which is left is now what if in case something which is unexpected occurs, so unexpected errors. So for that, we have created the errors for unexpected cases. That is, if you just go to domain errors, we have unexpected error. So the way it will be handled is we already have the errors controller. So we go to error controller here. And instead of this logic, we'll just change it to, so we'll just remove this logic, or you can just comment this out. So we'll just comment this out. And what I'll do is I'll just declare list of errors here. So from wherever an error is thrown, so I'll just say list of errors, and I'll take in the exception, and then I'll add the error here. So if you check here now, so I'll say errors.add. So this belongs to custom errors. Let's see where this belongs. This belongs to organization.domain.common errors using, yes. So errors dot, so this was unexpected one which we had created, errors dot unexpected dot internal server error, and we'll take in the message and pass it here. Okay, and that's it. So instead of this, we'll just call it problem, the custom one which we have created, problem, and pass in all the errors to it. Once this is done, we are sorted with the global error. So now what we'll do is to have an unexpected error, what I will do is I'll just go to my app settings file and I'll change the name of the database. So just to create an unexpected error, what I'll do is this organization app DB, which is there, I'll just change it to organization app D so that we get some kind of exception. And let's check what happens now. Let's try to get the company by ID and see what we get. It should give us a server exception, but let's see how the flow control is working. So let me try to get TCS again. Let's go to companies, get company by ID, and let's put the valid ID. Now it should fail. Let's see how the result comes up. And if you see, it's perfectly coming up. The flow control is working exactly we need. And it is also giving the exact exception which has occurred. So if you see, It is saying cannot open the database, requested login field. So this is the way you can handle any unexpected errors also with this flow, and even it will catch the exceptions anywhere in your application. And if you see, it is also giving us the custom error code which we have created. Okay, so this is one approach of error flow which I like to follow. And so that's it from this tutorial. Stay tuned for the next one.